Howdy folks, and welcome back to No Guarantees. It's probably been about a week since I last worked on this Jeep, but I did manage to get it running and driving enough to take it all the way down to the DMV a half hour away and try to get it inspected. But I think it's time we take a look at everything that I failed and start trying to fix it. Well folks, here's everything that I failed. First of all, the biggest one is that I failed emissions. I think I know how to fix that, and I think it all has to do with the carburetor and the fuel pressure regulator, but I'll get back to that later. The cap and the tank I failed because I started leaking oil and they kicked me out and they couldn't do it. And I also don't have a charcoal canister installed, which will go right back in there in the factory location. And I do have one that I saved out of the black Jeep. For the safety, I failed because I have no fender flares on it, even though I did take these tires off of the green Jeep and switch them out, so I've been driving around on the old tires for a while, which might not be the best thing in the world. But I really wanted to get this thing through inspection. So I also need to put some fender flares on. I bought a box of them. For the brakes, apparently I'm getting no brakes to the rear, so I bought a new Wilwood proportioning valve to replace the factory one. From everything I've read online, that one should work because they used that one in the TJs, which were disc. At least some of them were, and it's all the same part number for the proportioning valve. But my theory, at least, is that with the Ford 8.8 in the rear, the calipers are bigger than the ones on the TJs, and it's not quite getting enough fluid to stop the brakes. It'll slow them down considerably, but it's just not enough to stop them quite yet. So I'm going to switch that out, and then hopefully I'll be able to bleed them later today, and that'll help out my braking a whole bunch. So, as far as my plans to fix them, I really think the emissions, just because I'm running super rich, my fuel pressure gauge, which is not a liquid-filled one, still hits like 12 PSI when this thing's running. And I think it's just because my regulator is busted. The new chrome ones from Holley are pretty unreliable, and they do have a tendency to crap out very quickly or be defective from the factory, so that's going to be something I'm going to have to take a look at. And then I also realized that my carburetor is 2.5 turns out, which is probably a little more than it should be, but I don't think that's where all my richness problems are coming from. I think it's mostly due to the fuel pressure regulator. As far as the cap and the tank, like I said, I do have another charcoal canister that I can put in here. The factory location was somewhere down in there. I'm probably going to have to drill the stud out because I think I snapped it off, if I remember correctly. And then I can put in the old charcoal canister, and hopefully that one's good enough to get me done. I don't remember where all the vacuum lines go. I know one of them went to the air cleaner on the other one. But I know there's 3, and I don't remember where the other 2 went, so I'm going to have to look into that. As far as the brakes, I already talked about the proportioning valve. So hopefully that's going to be nothing more than just redoing a couple of these fittings on the end of the lines, putting in the new one, and bleeding the brakes. So let's get started on the proportioning valve. So here is what hopefully will be my new proportioning valve. I'll throw the part number up on the screen if anybody else is interested, but let's get to opening it. It comes with cables to run a brake light sensor, which I don't know how well this sensor corresponds with the one that came from the factory in the Jeep, but hopefully I'll still be able to use it. This is just a cover to go on the end of the plugs. And here's the actual proportioning valve. Now, I know the fittings that I have are different than these 5, so I bought these. Here's the part number if anyone's interested. Hopefully these work. According to what I read, they're 3/8 24 fittings, and it seems like they are. Now, I can head on over, drain out the fluid out of the top of the system, and get to work reflaring the lines with these fittings and putting this on. I've got my Harbor Freight $5 pump, and I'm going to start by pumping everything I can out of the master so that only a little bit of fluid comes out when I disconnect the lines. Now for the part that I have not been waiting for, disconnecting the lines. So let me grab a few wrenches, and hopefully I don't make too much of a mess. I don't know who tightened these down so hard, but I think I'm going to have a word with them. That's that. Now I can work on getting these adapted over to the new one. So hopefully now it's a lot easier to see the swap that we're doing. I'm going to have to undo both of these fittings. This one might already be correct. I'm not sure what this fitting is, but I know that this one's way too big. Adapt these over to here, and then we can go back over to the car. So let's go ahead and cut that fitting off, and we can flare on a new one. I find that the best way to use this is just tiny increments at a time. When I was a plumber for a summer, we did the exact same thing with some much larger copper pipes, and it was the exact same process. Just turn it a little bit, swing it around a couple times, and do it again until you're all the way through. If you do it too much at once, you'll put a nice big dent in the side of the line, and then you'll have a terrible time trying to get it to seal. So it's much easier just to do it the right way, even though it takes a little longer. There we go. Now that's done, we can take our reaming tool. Eastwood sells one of these. I think it's like 50 bucks, maybe even more. I got this one for about half the price on Amazon, and I'm pretty sure it's the exact same tool, just without the name. Ream out the inside, ream out the outside, and now we're ready to put a flare on it. Take your fitting, put it on. Don't forget about this part. And I think, unfortunately for me, I didn't leave enough wiggle room in here. So I'm going to have to go over to the vise very carefully, straighten this part out, and then I'll be ready to put this new fitting on and bend it back into place. But while I'm over here, I am going to go ahead and cut this fitting off as well. There we go. Now I can ream this side out, same as the other one, inside and outside. Now they're both cleaned up pretty good, I'm going to take each of them over to the vise, straighten out the last bends, and put the new fittings on, and then I'll be back over here to flare them. Alright, now that I've gotten them straightened out a little bit, it's time to actually flare them. I know some of you are definitely out there cringing at the fact that I put my brake lines in a vise, but I've found as long as you're careful, you'll end up with some very slight mars on the sides of them, but the inside of the tubing is just fine, the flares work just fine, and everything seals up without an issue as long as you're gentle. They make straightening tools to do the exact same thing, but they're pretty expensive. Regardless, let's get on to the actual flare. Now, I prefer this style of tool rather than the ones that you can rent at the parts stores with the multiple holes in them for the different size tubing, simply because, one, these are a lot easier to use in the car, and two, they're pretty much foolproof. Let me show you why. So you take your tool, insert your tubing into the part with the smaller hole, clamp down on these bolts just tightly enough so the tubing doesn't fall out, so I can still move it back and forth. Take your setting nut, screw that in here, hand tight. Now, I don't know if it'll show up on camera, in that hole, you can see on this side, there's the tubing nut, and on this side is the brake line. They meet right in the middle in line with this line. That gives you the perfect length in the tool to make your fitting. So now that this is hand tight, I'm going to use a wrench and tighten these two down. They're just 10 millimeter. Now that these two are tight, sorry that was out of focus, you can see that this gap is mostly gone along the top. You can back out your hand tight screw and grab the actual flaring tool. It has OP1 and no designation for OP2, stands for Operation 1 and Operation 2. You take your tool, a little bit of the included lubricant, get a touch on the OP1 end, just a little bit. Take it in, thread it in here, and tighten it down until this hex is flush with the face of the rest of the tool. Make sure to drop your wrench for good luck. Now that we're bottomed out, I can back this the rest of the way off. Take this, get some lubricant on the other side, throw it right back in there, and do the exact same thing. There we go. Loosen it off. Undo your two 10mm bolts. Pull your tubing out. There we go. And here is your fitting. Pretty hard to mess these up. I'm going to go ahead and do the second one, and then I'll be right back with you guys. So this is obviously a different piece of brake line with a flare on it, and here's why. I went to go screw the other ones into the proportioning valve with the fittings the way they come out of the package, and there's not enough thread engagement. I can catch maybe one thread before it gets very tight. So I took one of the fittings. Well, first of all, I cut off the flare and tried it like 3-4 times, thinking that the problem was my flare the entire time. I took one of the fittings and I cut the top off of it so that it's much shorter. And now, when I take the cutoff fitting, slide it onto the brake line, it screws right into the proportioning valve, and I can tighten it in without any problems. So I'm going to take the other 4 fittings, cut them down, make up my 2 lines using the same process I just showed you, and then I can get it in the car. This is the process that I've been doing to each one of the flares. The first thing I do, take the anvil grinder and trim the end down. I'm going to do that for all 5. Now I'm going to take this file and go around the outsides of all my cuts, and then take the same reamer I used for the brake line tubing and do the insides as well. Now that they're all flat, you take the reamer and really try to get in there, because from looking at some of the other fittings, they're really supposed to be concave on the inside. So hopefully if I push in with this hard enough, if I really push in there with this hard enough, it'll be enough to match the shape of the flare. I figure I might as well show it up close. Here's before the reaming, and here's after. So there's definitely a considerable difference in opening up that hole and making it a lot smoother. Alright, now that these are all done, I'm going to go ahead and remake my brake lines from earlier using the exact same flaring process that I went through before. And hopefully I'll end up with some that actually thread into the proportioning valve. Here's the upper portion complete. It definitely doesn't look as good as it did before, but it should work a whole lot better, and it still shouldn't leak, hopefully. Moving on to down here, this one in the front is the line for the rear, which goes to this lone tube in the front up here. So I'm going to have to take this bend out of it and put the other fitting on it. And these back 2 go to these 2 here underneath. So this one's pretty close. I'm just going to have to take these bends out of it. And this one, I'm going to have to cut a length of tubing off and send it right into this back port. So I'm going to work on that, and I'll see you guys in a couple minutes. was able to bend all 3 of these just by hand to get them into the right spots-ish. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean up the ends and flare them, and then hopefully I can put it all together and everything's going to line up. I do think these are steel lines as opposed to copper, so unfortunately I think it is going to be a lot harder on the flaring tool. But this is where it is advantageous, in my opinion, to have a tool like this that's more meant for working inside of a vehicle than the ones in the strip that I find hard to use anyway, let alone when you're trying to do it beneath a brake master inside of a Jeep. Now that they're cleaned up, or at least as clean as they're going to get, we can start flaring them. I think I'm going to start in the front and just work my way back. And hopefully we end up with 3 good flares. And there's our first one. So I've got 2 left. I'm going to turn the camera off, get those done real quick, because I've got class in about half an hour. And I'll be right back when I'm actually putting the whole thing together. Alright, install's all finished up. No leaks anywhere. The dial's pretty accessible. I've got the rear up on jack stands, because before I put this proportioning valve in, if I had the rear up on jack stands and I hit the brakes, the tires would slow a lot, but they wouldn't stop. So now, hopefully that I have this in, the tires will stop when I hit the brakes, even if I accelerate a little bit. Fires right off. We're in drive. Oh yeah, way better than before. I wish I took a video before I changed it because it was terrible. And if I accelerate a little bit, oh yeah, way better. Huh? I saw it. Oh yeah? You saw what? I saw the tire stop. Oh yeah, I know. Much better than before. So I just gave my phone to my mom and I had her take a video of me driving, and I found out that the fronts still slide before the rears, which is good, but I'd like to make it just a little bit more 50-50. So I believe if I tighten this about a half a turn, I should be good to go. I'm gonna have her take another video and I'll check it out, and hopefully this will fix all of it. I was testing the brakes a little bit. I started to come up to temp, which is a good thing. But I remembered that on my way to the DMV, I actually ran into some overheating issues. And when I got out and I checked, when I got there, I realized that I had no fan anymore. So I started tracing all my wiring to see where my problem is, and sure enough, I snapped a terminal somehow clean off the end of the power wire to the fan. So I went ahead and replaced this guy right here, and sure enough, if I can do this with one hand, maybe not. As soon as I plug it back in, fan works great. So I'm gonna go ahead, keep testing out my brakes, and then I'll be right back. So I think that's it on my adjustment. I've actually got it biased all the way towards the rear, and the fronts still lock up first. So I'm gonna leave it there. The last thing I have to do with the brakes today, I have a pedal out of an automatic Jeep, so I can get rid of that clutch finally. And it also just gives me a little bit bigger of a pedal surface, which I prefer. So I'm gonna get that installed, and then it's time to end off the video. Automatic brake pedal is in. I also went ahead and changed out the cap on the steering wheel and put in this little guard on the door handle that I guess is supposed to keep your clothes from getting caught on it or something. I don't know. I thought it was a good idea. What people don't tell you when you're swapping out these brake pedals is they do interchange. They do bolt in for each other, but the rods are different, which I knew, but which I didn't know is on the very end of the manual rod, the clutch end, there's this teeny tiny snap ring that when it's all the way up in there under the dash is almost impossible to see. And I knew it was there, but I don't have snap ring pliers that are this small, so I just went in there with a Sawzall and cut the rod in half. And then I was able to slide everything out and slide the automatic pedal in. But just so everybody knows that they're trying to do something similar, there is teeny tiny snap ring on the back of this thing. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on No Guarantees.